Hi, I'm Jamie,
Hi, I'm James. We're the Convex co-founders.
and we're here today to answer questions on Theo's YouTube video about Convex.
All right, let's get stuck into it. Jamie, there was a video Theo made very recently about Convex.
Yeah, that's true. I heard about that.
I liked it. I felt nervous watching it.
Yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking, but overall, I think we did okay. I don't think everyone on the internet agrees, though.
You know what's hard about watching these videos on YouTube?
What?
It's the YouTube comments.
The comments are the tough part. Yeah, that's true.
They really get to your soul.
Yep. They can be brutal sometimes.
And so today we're going to read some and react to YouTube comments on the Theo video about Convex.
All right, let's do it. I've got one pulled up here. Here's the first one. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You take the first one. All right, so this is Jake Levventhal, 4175. Says, rare Theo video where I basically disagree with just about everything. Convex is the short-lived affair. Postgres is your loyal wife waiting for you to come back home.
Wow. You know what, Jake? You shouldn't have to compromise in a relationship like that. I understand the value in wanting like an old, tried and true technology. If that was the case, personally, I think MySQL is a much more polished and refined technology than Postgres at scale. Almost no one will agree with me except people who have literally run these things at scale. Convex is a new way of doing things. It's a new way of doing things. And the target market for Convex is people who are looking for a new way of doing things because they find it makes them way faster and they get to have a smaller team and get more done and build better apps to scale better.
Yeah, I mean, probably in 1997, a lot of people were saying Perl is the loyal partner waiting for you, and Python is a short-lived affair, right? But the world changes, relationships change. Try Convex, maybe we'll stick around. We'll see.
Yeah. Fig Lolds. I don't always agree with Theo, but Convex, Chef, that whole thing, these guys are building the web the right way. Wow. For me, Svelte and Convex are a godsend. Astoundingly cool. If God designed the web, it would probably be similar to this.
Well, that might be too full of praise, actually, if anything, but we appreciate the nice words.
I agree with everything. I have nothing to say.
Yeah, it's flawless reasoning.
Yeah.
I think we'll accept this one and move on. We'll take the W. What do we got next? This is from Mike Schnickle, New Clarity. Convex is not a general purpose database. It is a framework plus platform masquerading as a DB for React/TypeScript devs who want zero backend friction. If you need an architecture that allows for interoperability, observability, tooling, and polyglot access, then Convex is a non-starter.
So firstly, Convex is not just a database. Convex is a platform. Convex is a backend. So if you're used to something like Postgres, obviously, or even used to something like a Neon or Supabase, Convex is not necessarily in the same category as that because people do choose between these, but Convex is an entire backend platform. So it's not just a database, but it's compute, it's scheduling, it's storage, it's an API service, right? It's a way to build applications. So I agree with some of this stuff. Like Convex is not just a database, it's a platform and framework. That is true. Is it a general purpose database? I mean, yes, it is a database. I mean, like we have written databases many times in our lives and run built databases that run petabytes of data and several million transactions per second we've written before. So Convex absolutely is a database. Is it a SQL database? No, Convex is not a SQL database. Convex is a relational database. It's a transactional relational database management system. It's a general purpose database. You can run arbitrary queries on Convex, but they are written in TypeScript. So
they are, yeah. That's, I think, the one piece buried in here that is true is that if you're not really someone that likes to write TypeScript or work in TypeScript JavaScript ecosystem, then yeah, Convex may not be the place for you yet. But as long as you like working in TypeScript, you really can solve just about any problem using Convex. It's pretty darn general purpose.
Yep. So. But yeah, some things I agree with here insofar as it's not a SQL database. If you really want to be running SQL queries, Convex is not the platform for you. Now, there are people who have Convex apps that are absolutely polyglot, right? They have their Rust services talking to Convex and their Go services and their Python code, and like Convex fits into a stack. Absolutely, you don't have to use it just as like the backend for React. But when people want to use SQL with Convex, typically they do stuff like stream Convex data out to another database, like an analytics database, and run queries there. This is XWE2S. The lock-in part is pretty weak. It is a pretty hard lock-in. You either self-host the entire thing or you switch to the modular pieces, TAN-stack, query, TRPC, blah, blah, but it changes fundamentally how things work and are architected. As you said, these functions are transactions and it batches queries. You cannot easily replicate that behavior. And that's the lock-in, the behaviors and mindset.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, it's fair. That is true, is that when you work with Convex, because Convex is different, because we have tried to innovate, make something new, you are working in a way that is unlike previous ways. And so, yes, it is difficult to replicate that behavior outside of Convex, but that is equivalent to saying that's the very benefit Convex offers you, right, is you can move uniquely fast. I think that one of the points that Theo made in the video, which I haven't heard made quite this way before, but I agree with, is that like almost any tool that gives you leverage that lets you work faster, you are getting kind of locked in to whatever particular advantage that tool is offering you, right? And so I think one of the ways Theo phrased it is, if you tried to take another tool set and make it do everything Convex does to be able to move as quickly, you would end up writing a bunch of code yourself. And so what you are kind of locked into is you've accepted a trade-off on like someone else having written that code for you. You can always go back and write it yourself if you want. You're really just kind of saving time by using someone else's version of those new ways of working that give you a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, Convex is very compatible with the architectural model where you have an RPC server running somewhere, and that's issuing transactions against the database. This is how applications always used to work up until a few years ago, and this is how almost every large-scale application in the world works. There's an RPC service running somewhere on a server, and that's what's talking to your database, right? That's how Convex works. So when you send a query to Convex, that query, that TypeScript code runs on the server, and it runs in a transaction. So if you're using Convex, you're going to get kind of addicted / committed to the idea of running transactional code against the database. And I think that's a good thing. Now, it's probably hard to move from, say, Convex to Supabase because all of a sudden you can't easily do that. I mean, I guess you can run your own RPC function server side.
Somewhere else, yeah.
But yeah, you could move from Convex to something like a Python RPC service,
or really just Convex self-hosted, and then our code base is out there. So if you want to take it apart and change it, do it differently, but make it your own, you can also do that. So.
Yeah, the thing is true. Look, if you save a lot of time and effort by using something that makes a lot of problems go away for you, and then you want to stop using that thing, you're going to have to invest a lot of time and effort building solutions to all those problems.
And that is a version of lock-in, right? You're locked into the convenience that you're getting by using a technology.
Yeah, that's a risk. Look, if you avoid hiring a back-end team and you build a big dynamic interactive app and all of a sudden you want to not use Convex and you don't want to self-host, you're going to probably have to hire a team of engineers to build all the back-end stuff and manage it for you. Giot says, I like stored procedures I would actually want to use.
Yeah, this is it. We've heard sometimes from folks that like Convex reminds them of stored procedures, and
it's like stored procedures. Sorry, I can't read. It's like stored procedures.
It's like stored procedures. Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely correct. Convex is like superpowered TypeScript stored procedures. That's definitely a way to think about Convex. And if you haven't used stored procedures before, stored procedures are a way to kind of put code inside an existing database, and that's exactly what Convex lets you do. So we agree this is an apt way to describe Convex.
Yeah, so people might not know what stored procedures are. So if you're using a platform there's not Convex, that doesn't offer like transactions necessarily running on a service, and you want code to run transactionally, what's a transaction? Anything you want to run atomically, like deduct money from that bank account, add money to that bank account, or do two things or multiple things at once, and you want them to all happen at once and not crash halfway and leave the database in an inconsistent state, right? If you want to run this without an RPC server, you have to write it in a language called stored procedures, like PL/SQL. And so I guess in Supabase you could use like PG/PL/SQL, which is a dialect of SQL. You can go try writing your application logic in this language. It's a
good luck.
Very, very old, very archaic language that you probably don't want to use for writing your application logic, and you'd probably be happier using TypeScript, as are we.
Yep. So this one is from J.K. Liang. Mainstream solutions are king, Postgres, traditional databases, and serverless, etc. I like the fact that serverless is now mainstream and traditional in the age of AI. So mainstream solutions are the way to go in the age of AI.
Oh, there's half of this I mildly agree with, and half of this I could not disagree with anymore. So the part I mildly agree with is that people like mainstream stuff, and I get it. So if you want to make a conservative choice, cool, that's defensible, right? The second is, does Postgres and traditional databases, do they work better in the age of AI? I've seen zero evidence that this is true, right? And in fact, we have found, and you could probably Google this, we have a lot of benchmarks that if you have like composable abstractions with type safety, LLMs do a much, much better job of producing a working code. Right? It's because LLMs are actually very bad at reasoning about non-local effects. So I'm changing some code in my context window over here, but that's going to interact strangely with some other code that someone else wrote in a different part of my stack that's running without a transaction because I'm in, for example, read committed and I'm seeing something kind of half finished. Our experience, and you don't have to believe us, just go, you can go try using Chef. So chef.convex.dev is our little demo of this, right? It's an AI code gen tool. We wrote it in under 2 weeks, and it does really, really well. You can ask it to write a relatively sophisticated app, and it will just pop out, and it will work.
I think sometimes people are familiar with the idea that LLMs generate SQL really well, which LLMs do generate SQL really well. LLMs are very good at SQL. But when you're actually solving the problem you're not trying to solve is give me a SQL query. The problem you're trying to solve is give me a working application. And once you have to generate all the backend stuff, like what's the SQL's relationship to maybe a server-side function, to a cache, to a queue, to the state management's on the client, and who updates when, and like once you have all the pieces together, actually LLMs are very bad at generating all of those things. So even if they're good at the database query, unfortunately that's only one piece of the puzzle. And to get a working app, you need smoothly connected assemblage of all of these pieces. And those work a lot better in our experience with a higher level set of APIs like Convex than with more traditional databases and systems. So
yeah, you don't have to take a word for it. Just ask your LLM to write you 2 applications in a language like Convex that has type safety and actually has transactions and guarantees, and then ask it to do the same thing without these. It will do demonstrably worse without these guarantees. Wally3810 says, Superbase collapsed instantly? Brother, it's just Postgres. Convex, oh, this is, wow, I already disagree with it. Brother, it's just Postgres. Convex is also just Postgres. What are you even saying anymore?
Wow. Yeah, all right. That's a good question.
Yeah.
So Convex is built on a traditional database, right? Whether it's MySQL or Postgres, actually doesn't matter that much. But it does use a database under the covers to store as a storage engine. But it ends up, I mean, part of the whole reason why people love Convex is that using traditional databases correctly is really, really difficult to do, actually. So many developers don't know, but almost all the big shops that run big databases, they don't directly use SQL, even if they're using a SQL relational database under the covers. They have their own higher level language on top of SQL, and part of the reason is that it's very, very difficult to use SQL correctly at scale and not accidentally create performance problems, either via missing indexes or a query plan going the wrong way or a join that's way more expensive than you think or a window function that actually has to read the whole table, right? So it's very easy to accidentally write things in SQL that are really expensive. So if you take the example of Convex, one system collapsing instantly that maybe uses SQL differently or has developers directly writing SQL, part of why Convex is able to be so loved by developers is Convex automatically steers you toward using databases the right way. It makes it so it's more difficult to accidentally take the underlying database down. So that's why it can matter a lot, even if it was just Postgres under both systems. One system will keep going for a really long time, and the other one may not, depending on how expert the developers are with using databases correctly, which is not easy for any of us to do.
Yeah, so Convex, not just Postgres. It's actually not Postgres at all. We have a, like I said, we just explained that already. Superbase is also not just Postgres. Superbase is a certain way of using Postgres where you're typically running queries from the client and running them on the server, typically not in a transaction. So what matters in distributed systems and scaling is not always the technology, but how you use it and the patterns you use. And so they're just different styles of patterns, right? When we think the convex ones scale well. The other thing I'll say here is, in my experience with Theo, he's a smart dude, and he also doesn't say things unless he actually means them. If he's saying something, it's probably true. It's probably his actual lived experience.
Oh my gosh, this is a long one. Okay. Do you want to read this one?
Yeah,
Maybe
okay.
we can
Source code
summarize it.
deleted says, I'm migrating away from convex. It doesn't do selects. Wow, there's a lot to read. It doesn't do selects of items from rows. You must select the entire... Okay, that's a great question. If you need to select a count or IDs, you literally select star and make your count. That being said, it was quick to set up. Okay, there's some positives. We can skip the positives. So there's some nice stuff in here, but there's two critiques.
Yeah.
One is that you can't select content from a row in SQL.
Right.
And the one is that he doesn't give you kind of efficient aggregates, I think.
Yeah. That seems to be the two things in here. So, not being able to select. So, in Convex, that one of the things in our pricing page is bandwidth, database bandwidth. And so, I think what this developer is referring to is the fact that you are. But if I say select just name from my users table versus select everything from my users table in Convex, there's no distinction between these in terms of the database bandwidth. And the answer is really complicated, but the short version of it is yes, because Convex is a row-based database, and like if you select in general, with a few exceptions, if you select certain fields from a row-based database, they might only return those fields to you. But they actually have to read the entire record from each row in order to get those fields out. So databases in general don't actually store, row-based databases don't. They don't store field data in separate places on the database. And so they are tending to read the whole record. The one, James probably has more to say, the one thing I will say that makes this even more complicated, though, is that actually because Convex has internal caches that cache a lot of the records you read from the database, you actually don't get charged database bandwidth for a lot of the rows that your queries fetch from the database. So the answer is like it's complicated, but I think usually what people are looking for when they only want bandwidth usage to count for a few fields is that we're not charging you for the bandwidth that we return from your server function to the browser. We're actually just charging you for the amount of load on the database to go read those records off of disk. And the same amount of data is read no matter what, even if you're only using a couple fields.
Yeah, so if you're selecting like name and email from the users table in Postgres, it's going to read the whole row. That's how these databases were written for spinning disks to begin with, so they're doing range reads. Like Jamie said, there are exceptions for column-oriented databases, etc., which you're not writing your web application on.
Yeah, and I know some folks that there's like Postgres has some extensions, like one called Toast, I think, or something, which occasionally a really large field will be moved out of band, but like it's really getting into the weeds. In general, for most OLTP databases, you're reading the whole record. And you could say, well, if it's only an index, maybe the indexes are already in memory. Maybe, but maybe they fell out of the page cache. It's complicated. Just in general, what Convex is doing is not really much different than anything else. And so, no, this probably won't change, and it's in general usually not how transactional databases actually work. So, and then the second thing was about aggregates, and why can't I just quickly get a count of some records that probably match some kind of conditional, I'm guessing, is the implication.
Yeah, this is how all databases work too, right? So now, to be fair, I think we can make our query language a little bit more convenient here. So similarly, like there's a lot of things you can write in SQL that look like they're magic and they're fast, but they actually just do a full table scan, right? There's things you can write in SQL like select rand, right? And you think you're picking a random row, and it's literally materializing the entire table in memory in a random order. So just because something looks easy to express in SQL, in particular aggregate style like select count star, looks like it's very efficient. Those generally aren't very efficient. Now, Postgres and MySQL give you kind of like schema info, like table, like you can query like estimated number of rows in a table, for example, that we don't expose. There is in Convex an aggregates component, which actually uses B trees on like predefined aggregates to give you very efficient aggregate style queries because they're computed incrementally. We should just make that easier to use and expose it more.
The difference with Convex is Convex makes things which are expensive obvious. And so sometimes that's actually what we run into a lot of times with developers is when they run into something that they're not used to, they'll say, oh, it's easy to do this fast in a SQL database. But they've often not really done it in practice on a SQL database that had much more than a few thousand records. And it actually is not fast on a SQL database. The difference is just one of our points of view is that the database should make it be quite explicit about what is happening and how expensive it should be to do certain operations.
I'm pretty curious, source code deleted. Reach out and let us know after you've migrated off of Convex what your bill was like before and after. Curious whether you ended up saving money. All right, Yumi Yugi 3133. I'm not 100% convinced that TypeScript makes a good query language. Imagine all the horrible queries I might find perusing the code base at work. It would probably be a nightmare to write these in TypeScript. Don't get me wrong, SQL's not great, but at least there is a data access language. The other parts of Convex do look very compelling, but I wonder why TypeScript is supposed to be better than making SQL or another query language type safe.
Yeah, I mean, a short version of it, this is going back to what we said before about SQL being good for analytics, is that if you were using lots of subqueries and window functions and aggregates, and my goodness, that would be a huge pain to write in TypeScript. And SQL is amazing at that, right? But when we're doing application programming, you basically never do that, or you really shouldn't. Otherwise, you're just going to take your database down. And so most things we do inside of applications when we're talking databases are fetch a record or a small range of records, and then maybe fetch a few dependent records based on that, right? A simple join. And so there's not that much code really to do that. And in fact, once we're using our favorite ORM and stuff like that, a lot of times the code tends to kind of look like TypeScript anyway, right? So in practice, folks find that their functions don't look that crazy at all when they write them in TypeScript, just because again most of what an application demands of a SQL database is a fairly limited subset of SQL that's more easily expressed as code anyway. It's better type checked, and it makes it obvious what's going on. And even the parts where you'd say this part is a little bit more verbose than maybe the equivalent SQL, especially now when you're working with LLMs and autocomplete and CodeGen, like it's, CodeGen does so well writing that little bit of TypeScript for you that goes and fetches those records that you end up moving faster anyway than you would recreating all this stuff in SQL.
Also point out that almost no one actually writes application logic like actual real transactions in SQL, typically using say like Python or any server language where you call begin and you're issuing a bunch of SQL statements and then you call commit, but you can't easily, for example, write an if statement in SQL. It's very hard to write real conditional logic in SQL. When we wrote Convex, we wanted it to, like the one developer, like the application developer, to be able to write the full stack. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to have one language people could use for their client-side logic and their server-side logic and their query logic. And so we chose TypeScript because that's the most popular programming language. And,
of the things we worried about when we made Convex, this is one of the ones we were worried about, and this is one that has almost never been a problem in practice. So most developers find once they start writing Convex, it's not a very big deal at all to be using TypeScript to address the application database. So if you haven't tried it, I know you said otherwise the platform looks appealing. I would say give it a try, even just give it an hour and see if it ends up feeling like a big deal. It probably won't. It probably will feel pretty intuitive. Yeah. Innsmouth Admiral, right, says, see now, Uncle Bob laughing high atop his mountain, freshly showered and clad in his bathrobe. The golden sun shines through him and him alone. Wow. Yeah. It's very poetic.
Okay, what this is referring to is this guy Uncle Bob, who's been a seminal figure in the industry for a long time, who maybe surprised a lot of people by putting out a rant about SQL. And he was in a bathrobe and he kind of said why SQL was not good. And I think surprised people because I guess they all thought that experienced veterans of the industry all must love SQL and MySQL and Postgres. And I can tell you that experienced veterans of the industry typically don't. Right? They just like, well, this is the devil I know and I have to use it. Like Jamie said, most large companies using SQL databases typically build a whole bunch of abstraction layers on top of that. very rarely do you have 1,000 developers writing SQL queries directly on your database, because it will fall apart.
Seeing something like Convex and saying this feels like this maybe sort of confirms or is resonant with some of the things Uncle Bob was talking about with like just using code to talk to databases directly. There's definitely some parallels there with some of the things the Convex team believes and has built here are, you know, in agreement with, as far as I can tell, in general, what Uncle Bob's point was that day in the bathrobe. Cool. I think that's the last of the questions.
That's the end. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Besides that, everyone loved Convex and loved Theo's video.
I'm sure every other comment. We didn't curate these comments, by the way. Someone else picked these comments for us to respond to.
We just answered on the fly, so we're winging it here.
And I want to say to everyone, I hope this is all in good spirits. I think it's very reasonable to be skeptical of new technologies. I think it's very reasonable to be like, wow, this is different than what I'm used to. And I would just say, give it a shot, see how you feel.
So I guess we're done for now.
Thanks
everyone.
Hi, I'm James.
The key here is you keeping a straight face through this thing, yeah. It was pretty funny.